Night City, you either love it or want to burn it. A wondrous haven for both the corporate powerhouses and ball-busting gangbangers. It's a place that is both adored and despised. Not many people can make the cut in Night City. You've got to be a special kind of horrible to actually survive. There are dishonest, lying businessmen, opportunistic mercenaries, and tough gangsters. And those people really do adore it. It's basically paradise for them, because the law doesn't really exist, unless you hurt your interests of the corp. However, Night City is also despised for essentially the same reason. A huge part of the world generally hates the place, and thinks of it as a hub of filth and villainy, which is a fair assessment if you look at it from an outside perspective. These different perspectives of Night City are what made this game world so alluring to outside eyes, and they expected for it to be phenomenal, but then it turned out to be nothing more than a disappointment for many fans. The launch of Cyberpunk 2077 was nothing short of a brutal gut punch, a game so hyped, so anticipated, turning out to be something so incomplete. And yet, no one could complain about Night City, the main attraction to Cyberpunk 2077, a dystopian paradise for thieves, liars and killers. A haven for everything bad. The way I describe Night City, it sounds like an awful place to move to, doesn't it? Well, that's true. However, in the world of video games, where violence and brutality take center stage for our amusement, this is actually a bonus. Night City is a mega metropolis for not just criminals of all shapes and sizes. It's a place where corporate entities thrive due to the over-focused amount of control that they can have on the entirety of the population. The people of Night City make their living just like us. They're either honest and earn small wages working their backs out in an overly competitive work environment, or they're privileged enough to go to schools that would secure them jobs at huge corporations, eventually earning millions of euro dollars. The third and most surefire way of moving up the Night City food chain is to become a cyberpunk. These are gangsters, criminals, and people from all horrible walks of life that choose to fight the corp and steal from them to make their living, sometimes even working in tandem with the corp to screw over other corps. Criminal activity and corruption are rife in Night City. That's something everyone living in Night City has made peace with. Of course, this city may be a location where dreams come true. It also penalizes those who are naive or overly ambitious, with just a small number of people managing to find sustained success here. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that Night City has been chosen as the worst location to live in all of America in 2077. This demonstrates that Night City is a distinct type of dreadful on its own, especially given the cyberpunk dystopia that has engulfed the entire world. It's a whole cycle of violence, with people of all types just bundled up together inside of this small yet incredibly vertical place. These things generally increase Night City's attractiveness as a made-up location. It is the ideal environment for a game like Cyberpunk 2077, where contacts with corrupt, powerful individuals are common and unpleasant stories are part of what make the world so believable. A deep history of violence. Before I dive deeper into why Night City is so compelling, let me give a small history lesson behind the creation of this place. Something that most people don't know about Night City is that it was built upon rivers of blood. In the late 1990s, American businessman Richard Knight predicted a great economic collapse. Regardless of her age or background, this event saw a massive economic disaster that would harm millions of Americans. Richard Knight had visions of an ideal new metropolis where the hopeful could flourish to be free from this calamity, which was brought in by hungry governments invading the corp's business ventures and establishments. So, Knight established Knight International to realize his dream. The aim was to build a city where the corporations could prosper. His ideal city would have corporations running the government. Laws would be specifically designed to support business expansion. In essence, it would be a refuge for business people. Richard Knight succeeded in securing investments in his vision from IBM, Petrochem, Merrill, Asukaga and Finch, and Arasaka before any work had even started. It was a success. They obtained funding sufficient to launch a large-scale project. Numerous corporations turned to Knight International after the collapse in the hopes of finding a city free from crime and poverty where they could start their enterprises. Richard read an article about a slaughter that had happened in a deserted town. It was known as Morro Bay. Richard managed to get the land for less money. The Arasaka Corporation was then hired to get rid of the gangs that were loitering there and turn the area into an official safe location so the building could start. Richard Knight and his associates changed the location's name to Del Coronado Bay to distance his fantasy metropolis from the massacre that took place there. Petrochem and Merrill, Asukaga and Finch provided most of the funding for Knight International's initiative. However, there is one issue with that. They weren't construction companies. As a result, they engaged the West Coast mobs, which included mafia, yakuza, and other organizations to supervise the city's construction. The Arasaka Corporation then ended up literally destroying every single one of those organizations that worked for them in constructing the city and taking over it themselves. You can still see hints of that violence in the game's world. You'll see broken locations in Pacifica, a place ravaged by gang violence and warfare. You'll see fixers who have divided the city into different boroughs, and back when it was Johnny Silverhand's era, the city was even more robust in terms of gang violence and people. They simply destroyed the infrastructure from within, but the overall power was still held by a corporation, just as you witnessed during the events of the game. The rivers of blood that it was built upon have never dried up. They run red even now, but instead of the mafia, the yakuza or gangs of other kinds, the blood and sweat of innocence is being drained more and more. Creating a real city. It was made to be realistic, of course. It's futuristic in every way possible, and yet it feels alive. It feels like actual people inhabit Night City. Night City has a truly lived-in feel to it, with densely populated boroughs with different types of people populating them and dangerous slums, along with a vast desert where nomadic lands have established a home. It is obvious that extensive planning went into developing this breathtaking urban environment. During the construction of this vast city, CD Projekt Red didn't take any shortcuts. This is demonstrated by the fact that CD Projekt Red, in an incredibly fantastic move, recruited literal city planners to create Night City as close to being like a real city as possible. This gives Night City its realistic feel. The roads feel interconnected with each other. You can take the wrong U-turn and yet still find your way to your location without having to go back around. The bridges feel properly crafted to be pathways that lead to a different side of the city. There's a consistent and yet entertaining amount of people always filling the streets, and there's more than enough places of interest for you to actually visit. There's a lot of verticality to it too. This is demonstrated by the vast amount of interiors that we actually get to visit. Then you have Clouds, a gentleman's club of sorts in Japantown, lots of slums outside of Kabuki, a haven for industrialization and acidic fumes in the middle of Watson, city center being filled with corporate companies and their blatant, unforgiving advertisements for their products of all sorts. It's a consistent place where you will find active war zones such as Pacifica, along with empty wastelands such as the Badlands. There is a rhythm and a feel to the city, and you can instantly recognize which part of time you're in, no matter where you are in the game, if you've played it even for a short while. The world is so realistically created, it feels almost uncanny, like an actual representation, or a literal simulation of the future we're about to get into. The autonomy of Night City, it's infectious. One must first get familiar with the concept of an autonomous free city in cyberpunk in order to fully comprehend Night City's status as one. These states, which are more frequently referred to as free states, are still a part of the United States, but they enjoy greater independence, allowing them to void federal laws and even enact their own. However, Night City is a more exceptional example. It is the only region that is legally recognized as a free city. Officially, neither a state nor a nation claims ownership of it. By 2077, Night City is a separate entity that is largely governed by the Arasaka megacorporation. This means that the American government has no power over Night City. It is ruled entirely by the Emperor Saburo Arasaka, and of course his family and company. The fact that Night City doesn't even constitute itself as part of the United States of America means that it's in the middle of this country for literally no reason. This fact in particular shows the power that corporations have over Night City. It is so aggressively overtaken by the corporations that it's simply impossible for even the most powerful governments in the world to rectify something like this. Instead of having it be part of the country and be an autonomous state with their own laws and systems, it's an entirely separate entity. This makes the law in Night City extra brutal, making it its own thing to be admired, with its own laws that make things such as prostitution, gun running, boxing, drugs, brain dances that are beyond extreme to be legal as long as Arasaka gets a cut of it all. You're thrown in the middle of all of this, a city run by a filthy and egregiously hungry corporation that it excites players in a way that any other place in gaming hardly could. The scale of it all. It appears that competitiveness is the city's overarching motive. The competition for height and flamboyance among buildings leaves little opportunity for you to see the path that you're actually treading, and those buildings disorient you with the flashy overabundance of advertisements, posters and promotional campaigns that they are ever so consistently running. You become disoriented when everything is so darn shiny, and that's something very much on purpose. Night City made me think of a particular scene in Altered Carbon. In this scene, the main character requires an inhibitor to walk around since his head is being inundated with loads of advertisements thanks to his implants. Although it seems like every structure wants to be the center of attention, none is. It's the advertisements and the corporation's agenda that is the main attraction in Night City. The view and access to such landmarks are being obstructed by masses and tons of what would typically be infill structures, covered with advertisements for soda, sex enhancement pills, ripper dogs, guns, brain dances, and so much more. It essentially makes you feel meaningless. You are meant to feel insignificant and little as soon as you enter Night City. In conclusion, Night City is by far one of the most compelling game worlds ever created. It's got a rich and deep lore behind its creation, and the history of its construction. This history is drowning in blood and agony, and so are the people in Night City at the moment. Their suffering is consistent, and so is their insignificance and lack of path in life. Night City wants to make you feel small, and so when you play as V, someone who wants to stand up against the corporations, to take power back from these corporations, it feels like a triumph. That's what engages you in Night City, taking back what is rightfully yours from a city of liars, a city of thieves, a city of killers.